Your Olympic hero has arrived. It's true, it's true.
You're watching Fugitive Red Eye, and welcome to another Dragon Ball video. Today I thought I'd talk a little bit about how I got into Dragon Ball. Now, I'm sure I've mentioned this in passing in other Dragon Ball content I did, but I'm gonna go over it anyway, because I don't think I've done a video dedicated just to this, so there you go. So the way I got into Dragon Ball isn't the way a lot of people do. I did see the entirety of the King Piccolo arc back on Toonami back in the day. That's pretty standard, right? Watching it on Toonami. But I really only watched the King Piccolo arc in its entirety on Toonami. And then after that, I would periodically see random episodes of Original, Z, and GT just periodically on Toonami when I was a kid. It never really hooked me, and I didn't really play any of the video games or anything growing up. You know, like, some of my friends had merchandise, right? Like, Danny had the Frieza and Goku walkie-talkie action figures, like they're action figures of the characters, but they're walkie-talkies. And I myself had some toys of it too, some Burger King toys, as well as there was like this golden Goku that came with this big-ass sword that I got from the fucking dollar store, if you can believe it. It's probably bootleg merch, you know, because dollar stores are like that, but still it was cool. I also had a Dragon Ball GT t-shirt with Super Saiyan 3 Kid Goku on it. But as a kid, it was really more of just a passing thing. I didn't really know anything about it. In fact, I didn't know the difference between Raditz and Vegeta, really, as a kid. I thought they were just different designs of the same character. That's how little I actually knew about the show. But then in college, while I was in college, I talked about it with a few friends of mine, and we kept talking about how the show actually had a lot more, like, over-the-top stuff than people remembered. And actually, this really comes back more to Dragon Ball than Dragon Ball Z, with a lot of the spicy content that original Dragon Ball has. There's a lot of risque stuff in it. And it's still there in Z, but it's severely, you know, toned down, at least on a sexual level. The violence is toned up, arguably, but the sexual content is much lower. But anyway, discussing this and whatnot, I just randomly came across Season 1 of Dragon Ball Z, the Orange Brick set, at FYE. And I bought it, because, you know, it was like, I don't know, $17. And, you know, I think I bought Seasons 1 through 3 all at once, because FYE had this thing where you could buy 2, get 1 free with used DVDs, and I bought them used at first. I did actually end up buying a couple of seasons new. I couldn't tell you which, probably like 4 or 5. But I was watching Z. I started with Z while I was in college. I watched through it, and what I would do is I had a habit, and almost a ritual, as it were, where on the weekends I would buy Panda Express and pop in a disc of Dragon Ball Z and watch an entire disc at a time using the Marathon feature mode. If you don't know what the Marathon feature mode is, that eliminates the credits, both the opening and the closing credits, for most of the episodes. So it just plays the opening once and the closing once. It just treats it all like a big movie. So I would watch a disc at a time while eating Panda Express, and that's what got me into Dragon Ball Z. And I remember I really liked the Saiyan Saga. I really liked the first half of the Frieza Saga. In fact, the second half of the Frieza Saga didn't really bother me the first time watching it. It did on my second time watching it. But we'll get to that a little later. I will say, however, after the Frieza Saga, when we got to the Garlic Jr. Saga, I got very bored and was actually starting to lose interest in the show, because Garlic Jr. was really boring. There's aspects that were interesting in it, like the, you know, the fog possessing them and the ultra-divine water and stuff like that. But largely, I would still say Garlic Jr. is one of the less interesting filler arcs. It's pretty bad. Not to mention, I hadn't seen Dragon Ball Dead Zone yet, so I didn't even have any context for who the fuck this character was when I first watched it. It's worth noting that I watched, like, the first, like, 2.5 seasons with the Japanese soundtrack, not realizing just how much better the American soundtrack is. Like, the Falconer soundtrack is fucking great, whereas the Japanese soundtrack is kind of dull. It's silent most of the time, and it usually just plays like the same trumpets, just going brr, 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 brr. Like, good thing Danny told me, no, switch to the American soundtrack, it's better, because I was being stupid and stubborn and being like, no, I want to hear the OG soundtrack. It's not to say there's not good songs on the Japanese soundtrack. I like Solid State Scouter, like, a lot, and I like Head Chala, but that's about it. Luckily, I wasn't watching the sub, either, because Goku's voice is fucking abysmal in Japanese. I don't care what people say. I fucking hate the Japanese voice cast, for the most part. And then, you know, I took a little bit of a break from it, I think. Like, I actually kind of stopped after Garlic Jr. for a little bit. But then eventually, after a couple of months, when I actually started watching it again, the Android Saga, which, as you guys have known, I've said multiple times, is peak Dragon Ball. It's peak. It's the best part. I remember getting really interested in it, because, you know, Future Trunks shows up, he insta-kills Frieza, there's all the interesting setup. And then Android 19 and 20 show up, and it's like, okay, yeah, cool, they're kind of interesting. But then, they introduce Android 17 and 18, and the way they just mercilessly kill Gero, and it's playing that really cool, creepy theme song that it plays, that's when I really got into the show. Like, that's when I'm like, oh shit, this is actually getting really good. I keep unintentionally glossing over Android 16, and I like 16, don't get me wrong. But 17 and 18 are way cooler. Like, 16's great, I like 16. But 17 and 18 are fucking great characters. From that point on, I was hooked. I blitzed through the Android saga, through the Cell saga, and I count the Cell saga as part of the Android saga when I'm talking about it being peak, because that entire arc is fucking great. And then I watched the Boo saga, which I think is also fucking great. I don't understand why the Boo saga is a divisive one. I actually think the Boo saga is great. Like, I don't like the ending. I think the ending to DBZ is kind of lame, which is why I'm glad that GT exists, and to a lesser extent, Super. Yeah, I finished it, and then I watched Dragon Ball GT. I love Dragon Ball GT, watched through all of it, and then I binged all of the Dragon Ball Z movies. I also watched the GT movie when I finished GT the first time. I actually distinctly remember being really hyped when Battle of Gods came out. But then sometime later, I would go on to buy Dragon Ball Original. And, you know, just like I was periodically buying the orange bricks from FYE, I started doing the same with the blue bricks of Dragon Ball. And then after I was watching through Dragon Ball Original with my brother Kyler. We watched through the whole thing. And it was fucking great. I remember thinking, wow, I really should have started with this. Because, as you guys may know, I actually prefer original Dragon Ball over Z, because I like the adventure aspect, I love the characters, the fact that Goku actually has character development in original, like, that's the thing, anyone who says Goku doesn't have any character development has never watched Dragon Ball. They've only watched Z. Because in Z, he's already achieved his arc. Like, there's still some development, but he is relatively static compared to, like, Gohan, because Z is really more Gohan's story, I would say. But yeah, I watched the original, and then me and Kyler started watching through Z. Again, we got through the Saiyan saga and the first half of the Frieza saga fine. But then, second time watching the Frieza saga, we both were kind of getting bored and tired of it, because it gets really repetitive. Especially when Frieza says, 5 minutes till this planet blows up. And then they just fight for 19 fucking episodes. Like, it's nuts. For clarification, Kyler and I have still not finished DBZ on the watch through with him. He got so disinterested in the Frieza saga, we have not continued. We're right at the point where fucking Trunks shows up. And it's driving me nuts, because we're gonna get to the androids, and I know he'll get back into it with the androids. But we just haven't done it, because the Frieza saga put him off so much. But the androids, we're right fucking there. Hopefully we get around to it eventually, but, yeah, he hasn't had as much interest ever since Frieza. Like, they keep bringing Frieza back, which I just think is retarded. Like, Frieza's kind of an overrated villain, I think. Like, I like Frieza. I like how cartoonishly evil he is. And obviously, Frieza's integral to the Bardock movie, which is my favorite of the Dragon Ball movies, even though it's technically a TV special. Another thing I neglected to mention is while I was watching through the anime, like, the first time I was watching through Z, I did also pick up the Budokai HD Collection and Raging Blast 2, and I played those as well. I actually got to the Android saga in Budokai before I got to it in the show, so I had to kind of stop playing the game until I caught up in the anime. And Budokai 3 is my favorite Dragon Ball game. But yeah, it was really in college where I got hooked on Dragon Ball, and it started with the Androids arc. Again, the introduction of 17 and 18 is what made it one of my favorite shows at the time. But even before that, I was still obviously enjoying it, watching a disc at a time, and again, with my sort of tradition is buying Panda Express and watching Dragon Ball. That's kind of nostalgic for me, even though it was back in college, but then again, that's still, time is going on, so that gets further and further in the past. Hell, it's been nearly 10 years. Thinking about it, it's actually probably closer to 11 years. I think I actually started watching it in like 2013, since I started it. With that said, that is nostalgic for me, just maybe not to the extent as some people did, because I didn't actually grow up watching it all that much, other than the King Piccolo saga, like I said. And the King Piccolo saga I've always loved, so it's curious to me why I decided to start with Z. I think my friends convinced me to just start with Z, which again, I always advise people that's actually a mistake. Start with original, because original is fucking great, and anyone who says otherwise hasn't watched it. Like, because Z is a formula, right? There's a new enemy, he's stronger than Goku, Goku trains, fights him, gets a new form, and then defeats him. Rinse and repeat. Every once in a while, you'll have other characters be important to it, like Gohan versus Cell, but for the most part, it's the same formula. whereas Original is a fun adventure series, as is GT, especially in the Black Star Dragon Ball arc. I will say that the later arcs of GT feel more like Z than Original, but the Black Star arc is very clearly intentionally a throwback to Original. So yeah, in the future I plan to do more videos on Dragon Ball. If you guys remember, I actually did have like a little bit where I was doing it weekly, but then I just kind of stopped that. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed hearing how I got into Dragon Ball. Like I said, I actually got into it much later in life than a lot of people did. I hope this video was enjoyable. Have a good one. Toodles.
What am I watching? I don't know, but I hate it.
Subscribe to Fugitive Red Eye.